Jake worked with a focus he did not know he possessed. His fingers moved across the intricate clasps and hidden fasteners of the princess's gown, like he had done this 1,000 times before. In truth, he had never touched Velanthy fabric in his life, but the mechanics were not so different from the complex machinery he repaired every day. Everything had a pattern if you knew how to look for it. The biofabric was fighting him. He could feel it shifting under his touch, trying to tighten its grip on the princess. Alindra stood perfectly still, her face calm, even though Jake could see the slight tension around her eyes. She was in pain, but she refused to show it. Around them, the corridor remained frozen in shock. The Velanthy guards still had their weapons raised, but they did not fire. The human diplomats stood in a cluster, their faces showing a mixture of horror and confusion. Nobody understood what was happening, except for Jake and the princess herself. "The clasp near my waist," Alindra said quietly. Her voice meant only for him. "It is the main anchor. Release it, and the rest will follow." Jake nodded and moved his hands lower, searching through the folds of shimmering fabric. He found the clasp she mentioned, a complex mechanism hidden beneath layers of what looked like liquid silver. It took him a moment to understand how it worked, but then his fingers found the release point and pressed. The gown fell away. It dropped to the floor in a heap of shimmering material, and immediately began to writhe and twist like a living creature in agony. The biofabric contracted violently, squeezing itself into a tight ball, before going completely still. If the princess had still been wearing it, the result would have been terrible. Alindra stood before everyone in her simple white underrobe, a thin garment that covered her modestly, but was clearly not meant to be seen in public. For a Velanthy princess to appear this way before strangers was almost unthinkable. Yet she showed no embarrassment. Instead, she looked down at the ruined gown on the floor, then back up at Jake. "You knew," she said. It was not a question. Jake swallowed hard. Now that the immediate danger had passed, he was becoming aware of how many people were staring at him. Important people. Powerful people. People who could make his life very difficult, with a single word. "I read about it," he said honestly. "A few weeks ago, I was fixing a computer, and some files got downloaded to my tablet by accident. There was information about Velanthy biofabric, and how Earth coffee affects it. I remember thinking it was interesting." "Interesting," Alindra repeated. A small smile appeared on her perfect face. "You read about the sacred garments of my people, and found it interesting." "I find most things interesting," Jake admitted. "I like knowing how stuff works." One of the Velanthy guards stepped forward, a tall male with stern features and cold eyes. "Princess, this human has touched your person and seen you in a state of undress. The law demands punishment. He must face justice for this offense." Jake felt his stomach drop. Of course there would be some ancient law about this. There was always some ancient law. But Alindra raised her hand, and the guard fell silent immediately. "Commander Vethril, this human saved my life." The gown had already begun to constrict. If he had hesitated even a moment longer, I would have been seriously harmed, perhaps killed. "That cannot be," another Velanthy said, stepping forward. This one was older, dressed in robes that marked him as some kind of advisor. "Our garments are carefully prepared. They would never malfunction." And yet this one did. Alindra gestured to the still mass of fabric on the floor. "Look at it, Advisor Morath. The biofabric is dead. It went into constriction shock. If this human had not acted with such speed and precision, I would not be standing here." The Advisor Morath looked at Jake with an expression that was difficult to read. There was surprise there, certainly, but also something else. Something that looked almost like anger. "A fortunate accident," Morath said smoothly. "The human spills his drink on you, nearly causes your death, and then becomes a hero by fixing the problem he created. How convenient." "I didn't mean to spill anything," Jake said, finding his voice. "I was running late, and I came around the corner too fast. I didn't even know anyone would be in this hallway. Captain Laura Hensley pushed through the crowd, her face showing the stress of someone whose career was flashing before her eyes. She was a tall woman in her 50s, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, and eyes that had seen too many diplomatic disasters. "Your Highness," she said, bowing deeply, "on behalf of the Terran Alliance, I offer our deepest apologies for this incident. This crew member will be disciplined severely for his carelessness." "Your crew member will be rewarded," Alindra said firmly. "He showed quick thinking, steady hands, and courage in a moment of crisis. While your diplomats stood frozen, while my own guards failed to recognize the danger, this man acted. He saved my life without any thought for himself." Captain Hensley opened her mouth, then closed it again. She looked at Jake with an expression of complete bewilderment. Jake shrugged helplessly. "I am declaring this human my Vethkari," Alindra announced. The effect of these words was immediate and dramatic. The Velanthi delegation gasped collectively. Several of them began speaking rapidly in their own language. Advisor Morath's face went pale, then flushed with what looked like barely contained fury. "Princess, you cannot," Commander Vethral said. "The Vethkari bond is sacred. It has never been granted to an outsider." "There is no law against it," Alindra replied calmly. "I have checked. The bond may be granted to any being who saves a royal's life with pure intentions. This human qualifies." "What exactly is a Vethkari?" Captain Hensley asked carefully. "A protected companion," Alindra explained. "Someone who walks beside the royal family under our complete protection. He cannot be harmed, threatened, or detained by any Velanthi authority. To attack him would be the same as attacking me." Jake felt like the floor was tilting beneath his feet. An hour ago he had been unclogging a drain on Deck 12. Now an alien princess was declaring him her protected companion in front of dozens of witnesses. "I don't need any rewards," he said. "Really, I just did what anyone would do." Alindra turned to face him fully, and for the first time, Jake saw warmth in those violet eyes. "That is exactly why you deserve it, Jake Brennan. You say you did what anyone would do, but look around you. No one else moved, no one else acted. Only you." She reached out and took his hand, pressing something small and cold into his palm. Jake looked down and saw a pin made of some silvery metal he did not recognize, shaped like a flowing wave. "Wear this," Alindra said. "It marks you as mine, my Vethkari, my protector who does not know he is protecting. My hero who does not know he is heroic." Jake looked at the pin, then at the princess, then at all the important people staring at him with expressions ranging from shock to anger to something that might have been admiration. "I really just wanted to get to my shift on time," he said weakly. For the first time in over 300 years, Princess Alindra Vethsera laughed in the presence of outsiders. The sound was beautiful and unexpected, like discovering a hidden waterfall in the middle of a desert. And that was when Jake Brennan realized his life would never be simple again. The next 3 days were the strangest of Jake's entire life. He had gone from being a nobody who fixed pipes and replaced filters to being someone that very important people wanted to talk to. Diplomats sought his opinion on matters he did not understand. Officers who had never looked at him twice now greeted him by name. Everyone wanted to know about the man who had saved the Velanthi princess. Jake hated every moment of it. He was not built for attention. He liked quiet spaces, simple problems, and the satisfaction of making broken things work again. Now he was expected to attend formal dinners, wear uncomfortable dress uniforms, and make small talk with beings who had lived for centuries. The Velanthi delegation had delayed their departure to allow the princess time to recover from her ordeal and to acquire new ceremonial garments from their homeworld. This meant that Jake had to continue playing the role of Vethkari, whether he wanted to or not. "You could at least try to look like you are enjoying yourself," said Danny Kowalski, Jake's best friend on the ship. Danny was a short, round man with a permanent smile and an endless supply of bad jokes. He worked in the engineering section and had known Jake for 5 years. "I am not enjoying myself," Jake replied. They were standing in a corner of the main reception hall, where yet another formal gathering was taking place. Volanthi nobles in flowing robes mingled with human diplomats in stiff uniforms. Soft music played from hidden speakers. Everything smelled like expensive perfume and political tension. "The princess keeps looking at you," Danny said with a grin. Jake did not turn to look. He knew Danny was right. He could feel Ailindra's gaze on him throughout every event, watching him with those violet eyes that seemed to see right through him. It made him uncomfortable in ways he could not explain. "She is probably making sure I don't break anything," Jake muttered. "Or she likes you." "That is ridiculous. She is a princess. I fix toilets." Danny shrugged. "Stranger things have happened. Remember when the captain's cat fell in love with that maintenance robot?" Despite his mood, Jake smiled slightly. "That was pretty strange." "My point exactly. The universe is full of surprises." Before Jake could respond, he noticed Ailindra moving toward them. The crowd seemed to part naturally for her, nobles and diplomats stepping aside without even seeming to notice they were doing it. She moved with a grace that made walking look like dancing. "Jake Brennan," she said when she reached them, "you are hiding in the corner again." "I am not hiding," Jake said. "I am strategically positioning myself away from people who want to talk to me. That is the definition of hiding." Danny made a small coughing sound. "I should go check on the thing, the important thing, somewhere else." He gave Jake a meaningful look and disappeared into the crowd. Jake watched him go with a sense of betrayal. He was now alone with the princess, and several dozen people were pretending not to stare at them. "Walk with me," Ailindra said. It was not quite a command, but it was not quite a request either. They left the reception hall and moved through quieter corridors until they reached the observation deck. The large windows showed the endless darkness of space, scattered with distant stars like diamonds on black velvet. It was one of Jake's favorite places on the ship, a spot where he often came to think when the rest of the world felt too crowded. "You do not like any of this," Ailindra said, standing beside him at the window. "Is it that obvious?" "To me, yes. My people are trained from birth to read emotions in others. You wear your discomfort like a heavy coat." Jake sighed. "I'm sorry if I am embarrassing you. I am not very good at formal events. I never know what to say or how to act." "You are not embarrassing me." Ailindra turned to look at him directly. "You are fascinating me. In 300 years, I have never met anyone quite like you. Someone who spills coffee on royalty? Someone who is genuinely unimpressed by status and power." She smiled, and it transformed her face from beautiful to breathtaking. "Do you know how rare that is? Everyone I meet wants something from me. They want favors, alliances, trade agreements, marriages. They see me as a tool, a prize, a stepping stone to greater things. But you look at me and see only a person." Jake considered this. "I guess I never really thought about it. You seem nice enough. A bit formal maybe, but nice." Ailindra laughed again, that musical sound that seemed so out of place coming from someone so dignified. "Nice. The princess of the Volanthi Empire, ruler of 17 star systems, keeper of the ancient flames, and I am nice. Would you prefer not nice?" "I would prefer honesty, which is exactly what you give me." She looked back out at the stars. "My people live for a very long time, Jake. We count our years in centuries. This makes us patient, but also very slow to change. We value tradition above almost everything else." "That sounds exhausting." "It is. More than you know." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "The Volanthi Empire has been in decline for 1,000 years. We are powerful, Yes, but we are stagnant. We have not had a new idea in generations. We simply repeat the same patterns over and over, telling ourselves that this is wisdom, when it is really just fear. Fear of what? Of becoming irrelevant, of being replaced by younger species who move faster and think differently. She glanced at him. Species like yours. Jake shifted uncomfortably. Humans are not anything special. We have only been in space for a few hundred years. We are still figuring things out. That is exactly what makes you special. You are still figuring things out. You make mistakes, learn from them, and try again. You do not wait for permission or consult ancient texts. You just act. She gestured at him. You spilled coffee on me, and then without any hesitation, you helped me. You did not stop to consider protocols or consequences. You saw a problem, and you fixed it. That is just how I am built. And that is why I chose you as my Vethkari. Ailindra's voice became serious. Not because you saved my life, though that mattered, but because in that moment you showed me something I had almost forgotten. That sometimes the best course of action is simply to act. Jake did not know what to say to this. He was just a maintenance technician. He fixed things that were broken. The idea that his simple approach to life could mean anything to a being as ancient and powerful as Ailindra seemed absurd. But looking at her face in the starlight, seeing the genuine respect in her eyes, he began to wonder if maybe there was more to himself than he had ever realized. So what happens now? He asked. Now we continue the negotiations. My people and yours will argue about trade routes and borders and ancient grievances. It will be tedious and frustrating for everyone involved. She smiled again. But I think with you beside me, it might also be interesting. Jake looked at the stars, then back at the princess who had somehow decided he was worth her attention. I still think you could do better than a guy who fixes toilets, he said. Perhaps. But I do not want better. I want honest. Ailindra placed her hand on his arm briefly. And you, Jake Brennan, are the most honest person I have ever met. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars turn slowly outside the window. Two very different beings from two very different worlds, finding unexpected common ground. Something was wrong. Jake could feel it in his bones, even if he could not explain it with words. After years of working as a maintenance technician, he had developed an instinct for things that did not fit, for patterns that broke without reason, for small details that pointed to larger problems. It started with the coffee. 3 days after the incident, Jake was lying awake in his small quarters, unable to sleep. His mind kept returning to the moment of collision, replaying it over and over, like a video stuck on repeat. Something about it bothered him, but he could not figure out what. Then it hit him. He had not been carrying coffee that day. He had left his mug in the maintenance office on Deck 7 before going to fix the air recycler. He remembered specifically because he had been annoyed about forgetting it. But when he was running through the corridor and crashed into the princess, he had definitely been holding a full mug of coffee. Where had it come from? Jake sat up in his bed, his heart beating faster. He tried to remember the details of that morning. He had finished the repair on Deck 7, checked his communicator for his next assignment, and started walking toward Deck 9. Somewhere along the way, someone had handed him a mug of coffee. Who? When? He could not remember clearly. The next morning, Jake went to Danny with his concerns. They met in the engineering workshop, a cluttered room full of spare parts and half-finished projects, where they could talk without being overheard. You think someone set you up? Danny asked, his usually cheerful face now serious. I think something strange happened, and I want to know what. Jake paced the small space between workbenches. That coffee did not appear by magic. Someone gave it to me. And why was the princess in that corridor at all? The formal reception was on Deck 2, on the other side of the ship. Danny pulled up a terminal and began typing. "Let me check the ship's internal logs. Every corridor has sensors that track movement." They spent the next 2 hours following the data trail. What they found made Jake's blood run cold. The service corridor on Deck 4, the one Jake usually used, had been flooded on purpose. Someone had remotely triggered a valve release at exactly the right time to force Jake onto the main corridor. The princess's route had also been altered, a last-minute change to her schedule that brought her to that exact spot at that exact moment. And the coffee? It had been delivered by a service drone that had no business being on Deck 7. The drone's records showed it had been reprogrammed from an unknown terminal. This was planned. Someone wanted you to collide with the princess. But why? If I had not known about the biofabric, she could have been killed. Danny's eyes went wide. Maybe that was the point. The realization hit Jake like a physical blow. Someone had tried to use him as an unwitting assassin. If the princess had died, humanity would have been blamed. The peace negotiations would have collapsed. War might have followed. "We need to tell Captain Hensley," Jake said. "We need more evidence first. Right now all we have is circumstantial data. We need to know who reprogrammed that drone." They worked through the night, following digital trails and cross-referencing access logs. The deeper they dug, the more complex the conspiracy became. Multiple systems had been compromised. Multiple people had been involved. By dawn, they had identified 2 suspects. The first was Advisor Morath Velketh, the Volanthi elder who had seemed so angry when Jake saved the princess. His access codes had been used to alter the princess's schedule. The second was a human diplomat named Gregory Kane, a mid-level negotiator who had access to the ship's internal systems. His codes had been used to reprogram the drone. "A Volanthi and a human working together," Danny said, rubbing his tired eyes. "Who would have thought?" "People who want war," Jake replied grimly. "People on both sides who would rather fight than make peace." They brought their findings to Captain Hensley, who listened with growing horror. When they finished, she sat in silence for a long moment, her face pale. "If this is true, the implications are enormous," she said finally, "but we cannot act without confirmation. Accusing an Volanthi advisor of attempted murder could destroy everything we have worked for." "What about accusing a human diplomat?" Jake asked. "That would be just as bad." The captain sighed heavily. "We need to handle this carefully, very carefully." In the end, it was Alindra who solved the problem. When Jake told her what he had discovered, she did not react with shock or disbelief. Instead, she nodded slowly, as if confirming something she had already suspected. "I have noticed things as well," she admitted. "Small inconsistencies. Advisor Morath has been opposed to this treaty from the beginning. He believes humans are inferior beings who will only corrupt our culture. And Gregory Kane believes the Volanthi are a threat that should be eliminated before they become too powerful," Jake added. "I found messages between them. They have been working together for months. Enemies united by their hatred of peace." Alindra's voice was sad. "It is a story as old as time itself." They presented their evidence to a joint council of human and Volanthi officials. The reaction was explosive. Guards were called. Arguments erupted. For a terrible moment, it seemed like the fragile peace might shatter completely. But then something unexpected happened. Commander Vethral, the stern Volanthi guard who had wanted to punish Jake after the incident, stepped forward with information of his own. He had discovered 2 assassination attempts against the human delegation that Volanthi security had quietly prevented. Someone on their side had been trying to spark a war, and others had been working to stop it. "We are not all enemies," Vethral said, looking at Captain Hensley. "Some of us have been protecting your people in secret, just as some of yours have been protecting ours." The captain stared at him for a moment, then slowly nodded. It seems we have more allies than we knew. Advisor Morath and Gregory Kane were arrested together, led away by guards from both species. Their conspiracy had failed, exposed by a maintenance technician who had simply asked why he was carrying a coffee mug he did not remember picking up. Later that night, Jake stood alone on the observation deck, staring at the stars. He felt exhausted, but also strangely alive. He had uncovered a plot that could have destroyed two civilizations. He had helped catch traitors on both sides. He had done something that actually mattered. Alindra found him there, as he somehow knew she would. "You saved us again," she said, standing beside him. "Danny did most of the work. But you noticed the inconsistency. You asked the questions no one else thought to ask." She placed her hand on his arm. "That is twice now you have changed history, Jake Brennan. How does it feel?" Jake thought about it for a moment. "Honestly, it feels like I need a very long nap." Alindra laughed, and the sound echoed through the empty observation deck, like a promise of better days to come. The trial of Advisor Morath and Gregory Kane lasted only 2 days. The evidence was overwhelming, the confessions damning. Both beings had believed they were protecting their respective civilizations by preventing an alliance they saw as dangerous. In the end, they had only proven how much their people needed each other. The conspiracy had one unexpected benefit. It forced both delegations to work together in ways they never had before. Human security officers shared intelligence with Velanthi guards. Diplomats from both sides compared notes and discovered that others had been manipulating them for years. Walls of suspicion that had taken centuries to build began to crumble in the face of a shared enemy. On the morning of the treaty signing, Jake Brennan woke up to find a formal invitation on his communicator. Princess Alindra requested his presence at the ceremony. Attendance was not optional. He put on his best uniform, which was still just a slightly cleaner version of his regular maintenance coveralls, and made his way to the designated location. He expected to find himself in one of the ship's grand halls, surrounded by polished dignitaries and floating cameras. Instead, the coordinates led him to the maintenance bay on Deck 12. Jake stopped at the entrance, confused. The bay was his domain, a cluttered space full of spare parts, tool racks, and the pleasant smell of machine oil. It was the last place he would expect a historic treaty to be signed. But there they were. Captain Hensley stood near his main workbench, looking uncomfortable but determined. Beside her stood Commander Vethral, his stern face softened by something that might have been respect. Diplomats from both delegations filled the narrow aisles between storage containers. And at the center of it all stood Princess Alindra, radiant in a new ceremonial gown that sparkled like captured starlight. "You came," she said, smiling at Jake. "Your invitation did not give me much choice." "It was not supposed to," she gestured at the gathered assembly. "I chose this location for the signing. I hope you do not mind." Jake looked around at the important people crowded into his workspace, trying not to knock over his carefully organized tool racks. "I am not sure my bay is appropriate for something this significant." "On the contrary, it is perfect." Alindra's voice carried clearly through the space. "This treaty represents something new, a partnership between two very different civilizations. It should be signed in a place that reminds us all what that partnership truly means." She walked to Jake's workbench and ran her fingers along its worn surface. "This is where Jake Brennan spends his days. He does not make speeches or negotiate borders. He fixes things that are broken. He keeps this ship running so that others can do their important work. Without people like him, none of us would be here." Captain Hensley nodded slowly. "She has a point. We spent so much time focused on the diplomats and officials that we forgot who actually keeps everything working. Peace is not built by grand gestures alone, Alindra continued. It is built by ordinary people doing ordinary things every day, sharing meals together, learning each other's customs, finding common ground in unexpected places. She looked directly at Jake, like a maintenance technician who took the time to read about a species he had never met, and used that knowledge to save a life. The treaty documents were brought forward, ancient Volanthi paper and human digital pads side by side. Captain Hensley signed for the human delegation. A Volanthi elder signed for the Empire. But, before the ceremony was complete, Alindra did something unprecedented. She handed the signing stylus to Jake. "Sign as a witness," she said. "Let history remember that this peace was made possible by one human who saw a problem and fixed it." Jake looked at the stylus, then at all the faces watching him. He had never wanted attention or glory. He had just wanted to do his job and maybe get a good night's sleep once in a while. But looking at Alindra's face, seeing the genuine hope in her violet eyes, he understood that sometimes refusing to participate was its own kind of cowardice. He took the stylus and signed his name in his plain, simple handwriting. After the ceremony, Captain Hensley approached him with an offer. The Terran Alliance wanted to give him a medal, a promotion, and a position in the diplomatic corps. He would travel to new worlds, meet important people, and help shape the future of human-alien relations. Jake declined everything except the medal, which he accepted only because refusing would have been rude. "I appreciate the offer," he told the captain, "but I am a maintenance technician. It is what I am good at. It is what I enjoy." "You could be so much more," Hensley said. "Maybe, but more is not always better." He glanced at his workbench, at the familiar tools and half-finished projects waiting for his attention. "Someone has to keep the ships running. Someone has to fix what breaks. That someone is me." The captain studied him for a long moment, then nodded with something like understanding. "Very well, Mr. Brennan, but if you ever change your mind, the offer remains open." The Volanthi delegation prepared to depart the next morning. Jake watched from the observation deck as their shuttle loaded with dignitaries and cargo. He expected Alindra to leave without saying goodbye. They had already said everything that needed saying. But she appeared beside him one last time, silent as a ghost. "I will miss you," she said simply. "You will forget me within a century. You said your people count their years in hundreds. Some things are not measured by time." She reached out and touched the small silver pin he now wore on his collar, the mark of the Vethkari. "I will remember you, Jake Brennan. When I am old and tired and the weight of my empire presses down upon me, I will remember the human who spilled coffee on my gown and then saved my life without a moment of hesitation." That does not sound like a very impressive memory. "It is the most impressive memory I have." She smiled, and for a moment she did not look like a princess at all. She looked like any young woman saying goodbye to a friend. "Promise me something. Keep fixing things that are broken. Keep reading about subjects that interest you, even if they seem useless at the time." She paused. "And perhaps, when you have the chance, read about the Volanthi mating customs. You might find them interesting." Before Jake could respond to this strange request, she pressed a kiss to his cheek, turned, and walked away. He watched her go, his face red and his heart beating in a way he did not fully understand. The Volanthi ship departed an hour later, carrying its princess back to her distant empire. Jake returned to his work, unclogging a drain on Deck 7 that had been giving him trouble for weeks. It was what he did. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between tasks, he would touch the pin on his collar and think about violet eyes and living fabric, and a universe that was bigger and stranger than he had ever imagined. And in the years that followed, whenever the alliance between humanity and the Volanthi faced challenges, Both sides would remember how it had started. Not with grand speeches or careful negotiations, but with one clumsy collision, one cup of coffee, and one ordinary man who saw something broken and decided to fix it. That, in the end, was the most human thing of all. Jake Brennan was running late again. This was nothing new for the 28-year-old maintenance technician. He had a habit of losing track of time whenever he got absorbed in his work, and today had been no different. A faulty air recycler on Deck 7 had taken longer to fix than expected, and now he was rushing through the corridors of the Starbound Hope, with his oversized coffee mug clutched in his hand. The Starbound Hope was not a warship or an exploration vessel. It was a diplomatic cruiser designed to host important meetings between different species. Today was perhaps the most important day in the ship's history. The Volanthi delegation had arrived for peace negotiations, and everyone from the captain down to the lowest crew member had been given strict instructions to stay out of sight and cause no trouble. Jake had received the same instructions. He was supposed to take the service corridors, avoid all contact with the alien visitors, and remain invisible. But the service corridor on Deck 4 was flooded due to a pipe he had not yet fixed, so he had no choice but to take the main hallway. He moved quickly, his worn boots making soft sounds on the polished floor. The coffee in his mug sloshed dangerously close to the rim. He should have put a lid on it, but Jake never used lids. He liked to feel the warmth of the steam on his face as he drank. The Volanthi were legendary throughout the galaxy. They were an ancient species, thousands of years older than humanity. Their technology was advanced beyond anything humans had achieved, and their culture was built on complex rituals and protocols that outsiders rarely understood. They were tall and slender, with skin that seemed to shimmer like moonlight on water. Their eyes were large and violet, capable of seeing spectrums of light that humans could not even imagine. Most importantly, they were proud, incredibly, impossibly proud. A single insult to a Volanthi noble could spark conflicts that lasted generations. And at the center of this delegation was Princess Elindra Vatsera, the only daughter of the Volanthi Emperor, considered the most precious being in their entire civilization. Jake knew none of this. He had not attended the briefings. He had been too busy fixing things. He rounded the corner at full speed, his mind already on the next task waiting for him on Deck 9. He did not see the procession of tall, elegant figures walking toward him. He did not notice the shimmering gowns, or the armed guards, or the floating ceremonial lanterns that accompanied them. He saw nothing until he crashed directly into someone and sent the entire contents of his coffee mug splashing across a gown that probably cost more than he would earn in 10 lifetimes. Time seemed to stop. Jake stumbled backward, his empty mug clattering to the floor. He looked up and found himself staring into a pair of violet eyes that belonged to the most beautiful face he had ever seen. The woman before him was tall and ethereal, with flowing silver hair and features that seemed almost too perfect to be real. Her gown, which had been a masterpiece of flowing fabric that seemed to move on its own, was now stained with dark brown coffee. Around them, chaos erupted in slow motion. Volanthi guards drew weapons that hummed with deadly energy. Human diplomats who had been escorting the delegation turned pale and began stammering apologies. Someone was shouting into a communicator, calling for security. Someone else was calling for the captain. Jake stood frozen, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He had just spilled coffee on someone important. Very important. Possibly the most important person on the entire ship. The princess looked down at her ruined gown, then back up at Jake. Her expression was unreadable. The guards moved closer, their weapons aimed at his chest. Jake was fairly certain he was about to die, or at least cause an interstellar war, possibly both. Then Princess Elindra spoke. Her voice was clear and commanding, cutting through all the noise and panic like a blade through silk. Every other sound in the corridor seemed to fade away as she uttered words that made Jake's blood turn to ice. "Human, take my attire off immediately." Jake blinked. His face went from pale to bright red in about half a second. Behind him, he heard one of the human diplomats make a choking sound. The Valanthi guards looked confused, their weapons still raised, but uncertainty creeping into their stance. What? Jake managed to say. "Did you not hear me?" The princess stepped closer, her violet eyes intense and focused entirely on him. "Remove my attire. Now. You must do it quickly." Jake's mind raced through 1,000 possibilities. Was this some kind of Valanthi custom he did not know about? Was she mocking him? Was this a test? His hands hung uselessly at his sides as he tried to process what was happening. Then something clicked in his memory. 3 weeks ago, Jake had been assigned to fix a server malfunction in the cultural database section of the ship's computer. While running diagnostics, he had accidentally downloaded several files onto his personal tablet before the error was corrected. Being curious by nature, he had read through them during his breaks. Most of it was boring diplomatic protocol, but one section had caught his attention because it was so strange. Valanthi ceremonial gowns were not ordinary fabric. They were living things, bio-organic material that bonded with the wearer on a cellular level. The gowns could feel, respond to emotions, and even protect their wearers from minor harm. But they had one critical weakness: Earth coffee. The specific combination of acids found in coffee from Earth was one of the only known substances in the galaxy that could cause the biofabric to malfunction. When exposed to coffee, the living material would begin to constrict, tightening around the wearer like a snake crushing its prey. If not removed quickly, it could cause serious injury or even death. The princess was not making a strange request. She was not insulting him or testing him. She was in danger, and she needed his help right now. Jake stepped forward without hesitation. "Everyone back off," he said, his voice suddenly steady. "I need room to work." The guards moved to stop him, but the princess raised her hand. "Let him approach." Jake reached the princess and began examining her gown with the practiced eye of a man who had spent his entire adult life taking things apart and putting them back together. The fabric was already beginning to move strangely, rippling in ways that suggested it was starting to constrict. He could see the princess wince slightly, though she hid it well. He had to work fast. His fingers found the first clasp, hidden beneath a fold of fabric near her shoulder. He released it, and moved to the next one, then the next. The gown was complex, designed to be put on with the help of multiple attendants, but Jake had always been good with his hands. He found patterns where others saw only chaos. The corridor remained silent except for the soft sounds of his work. Everyone watched, humans and Valanthi alike, as the maintenance technician carefully removed the ceremonial garment from their princess. And in that moment, everything began to change.